Hey everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman and welcome to 10 Foot Pole, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 4, Episode 23. Today our guest is Pastor Tuhina Rasche, who is a digital pastor and curator of Anamkara. I'm going to say it right, which is a digital mission start in the North Carolina Synod. And also a hopeful woodworker as she's working on her, tradable skills for the Wild West that is this place.
The upcoming barter economy that we're probably going to experience in a few weeks.
Yeah. You can be ready for it. I love it.
I mean, except for the problem, a lot of our lumber and a lot of our wood in the United States comes from Canada, and guess what's being tariffed?
Oh, I don't think I realized we were taking their lumber. That sounds
Mm,
about right. That sounds about
yeah.
right. We import everything.
hmm
Not related to Revelation at all, but just an update on the state of the world and how people are reacting to it.
Well, and by the time that this podcast is released, the state of the world will have already changed about 15 times over.
Yeah. But, just an update on where Pastor Tuhina is mentally preparing for the world. Anyways, today we're diving into our fourth session of our Revelation study guide, a study session. And if you feel like so far we've just kind of made it more confusing, I just want to be clear with you. We're not going to help with that today with clarity.
Well, and there's no clarity because I have so many questions as opposed
Same.
to like, let's talk about this and this and this and the analysis that goes with this. And it's like, no, why doesn't anybody talk about this? And like, why the heck is this happening?
And I think like again in all the commentaries and stuff that I've read, right? Like there are no answers to these questions. Like we just like this book just kind of dropped out of nowhere and it's like, whoa, there's some weird things and no one has any idea what's going on. So there's no resolution, it just is.
And I think it's okay to talk about it that way because
Yeah.
we live in a world that like, oh my gosh, we need resolutions, we need reconciliation, we need to like have things tied up in a neat little bow.
Yeah. The
And
audience is very aware that I say it all the time. Like I'm comfortable that not having the answers.
oh my gosh, if somebody has the answers, please let me know and contact me and email me because I don't know if I actually want to know, to be
Yeah.
entirely honest, but like if it yeah, no, never mind. Scratch that.
All right, so we're gonna dive into Satan's cage. And I'm gonna read Revelation 20, verses 1 through 10, from the New Revised Standard Version, updated edition. And just so everyone knows, this sale may be ended before this podcast airs, but Augsburg Fortress is purging their stock of NRSV Bibles because they're about to start supplying the updated edition. So if you want to discount a Bible, head over to augsburgfortress.com and do that.
Oh, did they give you like compensation for the plug?
Absolutely not. I just got an email that said that they were doing that.
Oh, okay. Well, I
And it
will
just
add it to
crossed
my
my mind.
collection of like
That's
18
because
other
I know that
NRSV
they're
Bibles.
everything's switching over, like Sundays and Seasons, all of it's switching over to the updated edition in 2026. So they're just like purging their stock.
Wow.
That's just a free plug. I'm getting no compensation from Augsburg Fortress for telling you to go buy Bibles.
Because I mean, I'm figuring the folks who listen to this podcast need to buy more Bibles.
It's possible.
You never know. Yeah, that's true. I should not. Okay. All right.
Bibles
Let's
are free on the internet now. Everyone has access to them. That's why,
but
like, I have physical Bibles and they sit on shelves because it's faster for me to look it up
but I also
on the
love the
interwebs.
handwritten notes that I've written over the years and been like,
Yes,
what the hell was I thinking during this Bible study?
that is also fun if you take the same Bible to all of your Bible studies.
I do.
I love that.
All right, let's talk about let's first read about
Let's
Satan
do it.
and then
Okay.
let's talk about Satan.
Okay. First update, the beasts. So we have the dragon, and then we have the two beasts, the one that came out of the land and the one that came out of the water. They have been like destroyed, put into like a fiery, fiery, I think it's a lake. And now we have just the dragon left, which we get more clearly is the quote ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan. And so this is sort of the final part of Satan's story. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hands the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit and locked and sealed it over him, so that he would deceive the nations no more, until the 1,000 years was ended. After that, he must be let out for a little while. Then I saw a, then I
Okay,
saw
first question. Okay,
I know.
keep going. Keep
I
going.
just like the way that it says that. Like, he's got to be let out for a little while. Like, he needs to take a potty break. Okay. Then I saw thrones, and those seated on them were given authority to judge. I also saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony to Jesus and for the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or its image and had not received its brand on their foreheads or on their hands. And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years was ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy are those who share in the first resurrection. Over these, the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. When the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations at the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, in order to gather them for battle. They are as numerous as the sands of the sea. They marched up over the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they were to be tormented day and night forever and ever. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
That's my favorite part.
Yeah, thanks be to God. Question mark?
Yeah. This is my absolute like favorite passage in Revelation, and mostly because of what we were talking about before we recorded, because like it leads to more questions than it does answers, and the question I can't find the answer to, out of all the commentaries I read, things I looked up, why
He must be
must he be let out for a little
for
while,
a little while. A
just a
little
little while,
while. I mean, okay, 1,000 years of being in a pit
locked
and
cage?
locked and sealed over him. And then it's like 1,000 years. 1,000 years. That's a long time.
Well, who lets
Um,
him out and
and,
why?
and for a little while. But he
We're
must
given
be.
no reason.
He must be let out for a little while.
Yeah, what is this all about?
And I wonder about like the must.
Yeah.
Who 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 decided this? I
Yes.
I would like to speak to the manager.
That's what I'm saying. Like, there's no reasoning. Why does Satan need to be let out? And it goes back to the question of theodicy, which I mean, we could tackle more now, or we can get into it in a little bit. But right, like, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the podcast. Right. So like, God has this power over evil, right? Or else God is not all powerful. So that's not outside of God's power. So good, instead of just like locking him away or letting him out for some reason, could God have just destroyed evil altogether? Why allow evil to remain in this world at all? So some speculation, right? Like, what would be God's purpose in letting evil out, letting evil remain in this world?
Well, what's God's purpose of letting evil remain in the world now?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so some have said in the speculation, and especially with more literal translation, right? Like we have to have evil because, without evil, would Christians would have no reason to rely on God. If
I
there's
like
no opposition to the Christian church, what would we even be doing?
I still feel like icky and cringy over like literal translations, but I think that's just me.
It's
But
not
I
just you.
also um I think about just kind of like, how long was the Roman Empire around? Like not a millennia, but it was around like a
It was
hot
close.
minute.
Yeah.
Like and it felt like it's just getting worse. And so even in the realm of like, okay, what if there would be like I mean, and this feels like so icky to talk about because I'm kind of like, am I a works righteousness person? Like, even though I claim not to be.
Hmm.
But like, I always kind of wonder of like, It's this reminder of just how low our anthropology is. That even
Ooh.
if we are like given 1,000 years to like be led by um, everybody who's been beheaded. With their okay, that's just another question, but we'll get to that later.
Hmm.
But I just it makes me wonder about our anthropology so low
Mm.
that even with 1,000 years of
The good
being
stuff.
yeah of good stuff, but also of like being judged, not judged poorly, but like just judged and ruled with those who had confessed Christ as Lord and Savior and died for it,
Yeah.
and then were able to serve as um, authority and judge, and that even after 1,000 years of that state of being, that our anthropology is just so dang low that we're we're captive to sin and cannot free ourselves.
Hmm.
And so for me, it's not necessarily that like we need evil to like rely on God, but yes, it is. But for me, it's just really looking at just like how low our anthropology is, because I think I very much rely on low anthropology. I think that's also part of, sadly enough, what keeps me in the church is that I am no better than any other person, and so
Yeah.
therefore I also have a super duper low anthropology along
Yeah.
with everybody else.
God is good and people suck. I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I struggle with this because it brings to mind a question for me of like, this idea of like, why, if God has the power to destroy evil, why does evil exist? Like, it it paints a kind of narcissistic God. And then how do we wrestle with that? God is good. God is all of these things. God will deliver us. But God's also letting the bad things happen.
Well, but what about now? I mean, so that's the other lens through which I'm reading this is that um, because we have such a low anthropology that we are terrible to one another.
Yeah.
And even in the midst of 1,000 years of goodness, we're still going to be shit. Oh,
That's a word you
bleep
can
that
say.
out.
You're fine.
That even after 1,000 years, we're still going to be shit to one another because our anthropology is so low.
Yeah. I know. Again, this just like begs more questions than it does answers.
Yeah, I think it's just like, there was a time in my life where I had herniated 2 discs in my back, and it was the early 2000s, and so it was the height of people prescribing OxyContin to those who were dealing with de-
Debilitating pain.
yes.
Got you.
And so while I was in this phenomenal amount of pain, but like in this really weird space within my body and not in my body, I decided to read the entire Left Behind series.
Makes sense. That really is the best time to do that when you're high as a kite.
But like I remember kind of like reading kind of like the last book of the series and just kind of like how this part of like Satan going to like being seized and like being thrown into the pit and locked in a cage. And then it's just like this teeny tiny afterthought of
Mm.
like, oops, Satan got out, devil got out. But then it just kind of, that's where like the oxy took hold, because I still distinctly remember of like Christ riding a horse with like a flaming sword, and in my
Mhm.
mind that was like a lightsaber,
Yeah.
defeating the powers of evil and throwing them into the pit of fire for all eternity. And like they were kind of like it was like the end of Terminator 2 Judgment Day, where the T-1000 is like in the molten lava, and like you see like and like reaching out of like the
Yeah.
molten metal pit of like all the different iterations that the T-1000 had taken during the course of the movie. And so that's kind of how in my like oxy altered brain I had viewed this part of Revelation thanks to the Left Behind series.
I feel like that's got some like left behind trauma there.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah. Because first off, it was just kind of like I had nothing else better to do. Because I was like literally like not able to move. Um, and then this was me like exploring. This was also the time in my life where I was like exploring Christianity. So like, let me read the entire Left Behind series. And then that's when I realized after reading those books that I think like nearly every religion on the face of the planet has its own absurdities.
Oh yeah. And we are in no way,
Oh,
no way immune
no,
to that for sure.
no. And I think the book of Revelation is actually like a prime example of how we're not immune to that.
Well, again, we've discussed this before that like Martin Luther was not a huge fan of this be included in the canon. He softened to it in his later years, but was like this is not scripture, guys. There's just it's just some weird things that are happening, right? So another question that I have. Okay, so we have this thing where like so we talked about last week about the mark of the beast and stuff like that, right? So the ones that had been beheaded for their testimony and did not receive the mark, they came to life and reigned for 1,000 years. And I like that this like it's in parentheses, which I always love when they do that. It's
Ah,
like the inside thought. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years was ended. This was the first resurrection. So we always talk about the second coming of Christ, right? And so this is a new idea about introducing two resurrections, right? And this puts into speculation like when does the 1,000 years begin, right? So was this the first resurrection, as in like when Jesus is resurrected the first time, so that 1,000 years started after his death. Some people place the 1,000 years starting at his birth. Augustine being the big proponent of that. That there was Augustine said there was 6,000 years of Earth's history before Jesus, and then the 1,000 years started when Jesus was born. And so then like around the year 1,000, people started freaking out and really doomsday prepping.
oh yeah, not like
Um,
how people were like doomsday prepping during Y2K.
I that and then it came around again at Y2K. Oh, maybe
Well,
this is the time,
oh
right?
yeah,
And
and
so
never mind that the calendar has changed.
yeah.
Like the calendar used in like Western Europe and like European or colonized countries, that the calendar also freaking changed.
Yeah.
So like, do we even have the date?
Well, and that's it, right? Like this isn't, and the author is very vague, right? There is no indication when this starts, unless you again point to that first resurrection being Christ. There's no indication like what, and it's meant. I understood some of the commentary I read to say that this 1,000 years isn't literal; it's a hyperbole, meant to be just like a long time, like a bajillion years,
Hmm.
so that we don't, that it's meant to be vague, that both the time, the place, wherever all of this is taking place is intentionally not laid out. And part of that, right, like it's a vision. It is not meant to be a prediction of the end of the world. That was
Right.
never the
However,
intent of
so
any of
many
this.
people use
Yeah.
the Book of Revelation as a prediction for the end of the world. And I mean, it's entertaining when you're in Hollywood, even if your films are going to be tariffed 100% now. Um, but like for theological value,
Oh,
predicting the end of the world, yeah, I think and I also I just get so irked when like there are like folks of a particular strain that think that they can bring about the end of the world or like the second coming of Christ because they can pinpoint dates and whatnot. And
yep.
I'm like, because Jesus is going to listen to you.
We've talked about that a little bit so far in our Revelation study, and we'll talk about it more next week. But right, the big one being like the Jehovah's Witnesses have literally like set dates, but then had to change it, and then they got a new president, and he changed the date again of when this 1,000 years was beginning. Blah 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 blah. So, I mean, again, the whole point is it is a vision. This isn't a blueprint for the end of the world. But it gets taken that way a lot, right? So this 1,000 year period for literal Christians, some say it started, with Christ, and that we're in it now. That that they take the time, the number to be hyperbole, right? That it started with Christ, the resurrection, but that the number isn't necessarily exactly 1,000. Some believe that it is still to come in some future time for the second coming, and some believe that actually that it will start after the second coming, which I need to look further into that perspective because that actually doesn't even jive from a literalist perspective.
Well, and I think like the thing that I also struggle with is just kind of like the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. And so kind of like this is the first resurrection, which means there's going to be a second resurrection. And just
Yeah.
kind of and like I think that's what we are talking about right now because it's just kind of like, huh?
Yeah. Well,
Um,
again, so that's where I think it, it kind of makes it points towards this second coming. And some of that actually doesn't totally disagree or it does jive with some Lutheran theology. We've talked about this before on the podcast. The thing that we like never talk about at funerals and stuff is that like in our Lutheran theology, like we don't believe that people die and immediately go to heaven. They
no,
die
people
and they go
die.
into the deep sleep
Hmm.
until the second coming of Christ when we all go to heaven
Hmm.
together.
Yeah, no,
Um,
it's just like we've earned our rest until
mhm. But
we're taking a
yeah,
we're
we don't
taking
like to
a
talk about that because it doesn't make for a good funeral sermon. I think it
yeah,
makes,
no, but like I would also just I mean, I think that's also kind of like why we have like such wonky theologies.
Mhm.
And that I wish that I think like I struggle because it's like thinking about like, well, folks are in heaven, and I'm just kind of like, oddly, I don't believe that.
but
Um,
you can't say that to people.
I I know because it's also an issue of pastoral care.
Yes.
And so the issue of pastoral care is like, you bring comfort to the bereaved soul because Luther was also all about that too.
Hmm. And pastoral,
Um,
and I'm a firm believer, like pastoral care always comes before theology.
oh my gosh, yes, because it's like if look, nobody has ever been on their deathbed and has asked me about the doctrine of the Trinity. And if somebody does ask me about the doctrine of the Trinity on their deathbed, I will just be like, let's talk about something else. These are your last moments. Do you really want
Well,
your
I
last?
remember in seminary, well, first of all, in CPE, um,
Did somebody ask you about the doctrine of the Trinity on their deathbed?
no, I got called to baptize a stillborn,
Hmm.
and I did it, right?
Hmm.
Like, because again, this is to me, it's about pastoral care. And I remember sitting in a seminary class, and one of my professors was just like railing, like, "You don't do that. We don't believe that. You don't blah 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 blah." And I just remember, like, I didn't say anything, but in my mind, I'm like, I would do it again every time because it's not about theology.
Mm-mm.
It is about pastoral care, always.
It is, if we're if we don't bring comfort to a bereaved soul, then what the hell are we doing?
Exactly.
And I think so. One of the things that I actually really wish that we would actually talk about in the book of Revelation, especially within this 1,000 years, part of it is not predicting the end of the world, but trying to figure out kind of like the systems and the structures
Hmm.
that are privy to evil.
Mm.
Like for me, that's actually what the book of Revelation is about. It's actually not about the end of the world. It's actually really telling people who are following the way of Jesus to be incredibly concerned about nations being deceived at the four corners of the earth.
Well, and looking
And
towards the deliverance, right? Like that's the whole point is in the end, no matter where it comes from, that we are to take away that God is going to be there and to deliver us.
right, but if we have to like wait for like the first and second resurrection stuff, then what are we supposed to be doing in the meantime?
Listen, this is where I just say go back to Jesus. Love God, love your neighbor.
I think for me,
Keep
like
it
this
simple.
is yeah, just love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Um, but I really think that it's just that one of the things that I really wish that folks would pay more attention to within the book of Revelation is that the powers of empire, like the systemic
Yeah.
evils of empire, like this is where we see the worst of humanity and low anthropology. and that the world does not have to be this way, but it is this way because of idolatry and of people wanting to play God and of people wanting to be gods.
Yeah.
And I think like this is part of why I also think about why Revelation was written, because it was written in the midst of just I mean, this was written in the midst of the Roman Empire, but it was also written in kind of like the death throe, like the time when like the empire was in its decline,
Mhm.
like as its trajectory is declining, not like an immediate decline, but like you can kind of like see the downward slope going. And when empires die, like they will do anything and they will consume
Mhm.
anything and anyone to stay alive.
Mhm.
And so for
Yeah.
me, like thinking about they will consume anything and anyone to stay alive. And so for me, that's the really thinking about like, all right, so Satan needed a potty break. But when Satan needs a potty break, shit's going everywhere,
Yeah.
literally and figuratively. And so in the midst of Satan's potty break, we are reminded yet again of the murdering and the damaging and the dehumanizing aspects of what empire does to people and to community.
Oh yeah, for sure. And and that makes sense, right? And especially when we put it in its original context and it pointing towards Nero and towards the Roman Empire being these mouthpieces or these earthly realms of Satan. That makes sense. But to come also about the earth, right? The four corners of earth. To just to remind the audience, right, that in their worldview, the earth is flat. That Jerusalem is the center, and that there are literal four corners of the earth. And we get this. If you're unfamiliar with Ezekiel, right? Like we get this thing of Gog and Magog in here,
Mhm.
which to me feels like a Lord of the Rings reference. You got the Aragog and the whatever the creature from the deep is. Anyways, this comes from Ezekiel 39, and so we hear the figure Gog, who is the chief prince to Meshesh and Tubal, who's from the land of Magog, which is one of those like corners of the earth, right? Where we hear in Ezekiel they come and God destroys their armies by fire. This takes place right after the vision of the valley in the dry bones, and God delivers them, blah blah blah. Um, but that reminds me of another thing here of so this vision of like Satan being in a cage and being let out of the cage and this millennium kingdom is like the only part of Revelation that doesn't have a reference to the Old Testament. That this is a unique vision, and until we get to the Gog and Magog thing, right? Like this is not because all of Revelation is littered from all this imagery from the Old Testament, mostly from Ezekiel, Isaiah, Job, Daniel, right, and Zechariah. But like this is the one part that doesn't have any of that. That we don't have any references to this Millennium Kingdom anywhere, which is like kind of
Really, like,
it's
what
it's
the heck?
it's strange, right? Like this just totally comes up out of nowhere. We don't know
Hmm.
where it is, right? Like it could be heaven, it could be earth. But the idea is that the author seems to be more concerned that we understand that it's not where they are, but who they're with, right? That this millennium is there with Jesus, with Christ.
This book is so weird.
It's so weird. And also to say that this like the story here with Gog and Magog and the coming armies that are trying to like go after the saints and that they're defeated by this fire, that this is like almost word for word what happens in Ezekiel, but understanding, but it's out of order. It's like a different order, and as far as like the coming of Christ and stuff like that. But that the point is like right that you get like the deliverance, and you can debate here and there about why the author chose to change the order from the original vision in Ezekiel, or not. Like why he did that, I don't know. You could go down a rabbit hole of speculating.
So many rabbit holes. But also, it's like if you're sitting by yourself on the island of Patmos in a cave, and you have time to yourself and and you've got an active imagination or you've got like you're getting visions.
Some shrooms. Yeah, I could buy it.
I mean, I wasn't going to talk about shrooms, but I mean, if you want to go down that route too, I was thinking more of like divine inspiration and like getting, visions and dreams, but
Same thing. I'm just kidding.
okay. Oh gosh.
Yeah, but then so if we talk about this like Millennium Kingdom, right? Like whenever it is, whenever it starts, and that's the thing that like a lot of different versions of Christianity have been really trying to pinpoint for a long time. But then we don't know. We just don't know. And again, and it's a vision, and we don't know. It's not meant to predict the future, not the kingdom come, right? Like the idea is to understand that this is a vision to give the people in the time of place some clarity of where they are, whose they are,
And how to be,
and how to
even in the
be.
midst of beheadedness.
Yeah.
I think because like one of the things that I
Well,
still
that's where the
struggle with.
comfort comes in, right? Like the
Oh,
Revelation is meant to be a vision of hope and comfort for the churches that it was sent to, right? And so this
right.
is part of that comfort. That even like I understand you keep faithful, you're going to be beheaded, you're going to reign with Christ. I
Like,
don't know necessarily what that says to us, but it makes sense to what it's saying in to the audience that it was sent to.
but I also think it should speak volumes to us right now. Um, like I don't want to just like lay over and imprint the book of Revelation over what's happening currently today, but I think it is a continual reminder of how to be Christian in the world. Like not I think Christian in a way that reflects the theology of the cross and not the theology of glory. Because
Mm,
I think right now we have a lot of folks proclaiming Christianity that are pointing towards a theology of glory, which is essentially a shiny golden calf when it comes down to it. For like when I think about like a theology of glory, I think about something like big and bright and shiny, and I think about Mubi from the movie Dogma, like a bright shiny golden calf that is commercial capital
yeah.
material, and that is not of eternal life.
Mm,
And that what does it mean to look at the theology of the cross where crucifixion is what happens in the midst of the theology of the cross.
mm,
And I think looking at this like through like I know like Luther was not a big fan of this, but I can't help but read this through the lens of Lutheran theology
mm,
and through looking at this through the theology of the cross because that is the comfort is that Christ is with us in our deepest despair and our deepest suffering.
yeah.
But we are tied to Christ's death as we are tied to Christ's resurrection.
Mm,
And so for me, that's actually the point of Revelation is really just kind of like, because I mean, like, there's some folks who are like, oh my God, Christianity is so persecuted. And it's like, if you look at the people who are living life like at the margin of the margins, like that is persecution.
mm,
But like, because I can't say Merry Christmas to like anybody and everybody who I want to say Merry Christmas to, like, I think we also really need to reanalyze our language of persecution.
yeah.
Because it's like, oh, somebody hurt my feelings. And it's like, love, that is not persecution. That's just you being like having power and privilege and somebody questioning it for just a second.
Yeah.
That's not persecution. Losing limb in life.
That's where I think sometimes that it is difficult for us to fully understand the context in which many of these scriptures are written, right? A lot of letters of Paul is that we don't live in that same field, right? Of
No.
understanding that Christianity, especially in our country, is the dominant society. And so understanding that where these Christians were coming from, right? Like imagine them being the black trans woman who is an immigrant, right? Like that is a much different place, um, and putting into context.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what's being called out, right? Is this kind of persecution. And so, like, if we are now the center of society, how does that change how we read this and what our call as Christians are to be?
I don't, well, first off, I think we need to have a better understanding of what the margin of the margins are
Mm,
and what put beloveds who were created in the image of God there.
mm,
Because it didn't all just happen by itself.
back to that low anthropology.
Very low anthropology. Like, look, if you let Satan out for a potty break, Satan's going to do what Satan's going to do. I think that's actually what I'm going to call like this section if I ever like I wish this could be like I want to preach on this. And I think I'm just going to be like I'm just going to have to force somebody to be like you're going to have to listen to a sermon on this. Um
Well, right, because we don't preach on this. This is
oh
not
my
in the
God.
lectionary.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do you think that the lectionary folks would like let this stuff in?
Uh-huh.
But
This
like
isn't
I
happy and joyous. This gets to weird places.
but like my sermon title for this would be Satan's potty break.
I, that's a good
And
one.
or, shit goes flying or poop goes flying. Poop goes flying during Satan's potty break.
Mm, that's the synopsis.
That is my synopsis of this thousand
Yeah.
years. And the fiery pit. Can we talk about the fiery pit?
Let's talk about the fiery pit.
Because I also just kind of like I have questions about kind of like I mean, it makes me think of Golgotha, but I'm also just kind of like, where did this fiery pit come from? But of course, like, where did the cage come from? And the other, I wonder, like, what was the geography?
Well, and so that's part of it too, is it's not meant to be geographical at
Mhm.
all, right? Like this is a vision. You can't pinpoint where either of these things are. We don't even know if they're like in this realm, in this dimension, or, whatever.
Well, and also just kind of like imagining. Like, what kind of like vision from God did it take to like see this kind of bonkers stuff?
I'm telling you, shrooms.
I know. It just like, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into a lake of fire and sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet were, and they'll be tormented day and night forever and ever. Like, do we get to see this tormenting, or does
So
it just
they're in
happen?
South Dakota.
Oh, I've never been to South Dakota.
It's actually very lovely. Um, just thinking, I like the sulfur pits. Oh wait,
But
that's in Wyoming. Wyoming.
it, oh gosh, I think it's just kind of like, I mean, I also realize it's this realization of like evil will never have the final say because it is also what my faith tells me.
Yes.
Um,
In which we will get to in the next chapter.
but I also think it's like, can't it just end?
Again, this is that big question of theodicy.
Well, and I think like part of it, I think imagery is also needed. If this is a letter or if this is a letter of like pastoral care or like a proclamation of pastoral care that's being sent to a variety of different communities. And so I think part of it is also just like the need of imagery and the need of like what could this look like?
Hmm.
And I think part of it is engaging the imagination because I think that's also why parts of Revelation are so bonkers is because we're required to not be in our post-enlightenment brains, but we're called to like be embodied and in our hearts.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's a huge challenge, right? Like even as we sit here and we talk about this from like a huge scholarly perspective. Um, but mostly like to understand that like how we unpack this is that we need to put ourselves in the head and the heart space.
And I think like the reason why I wanted like when you had asked like do you want to talk about like the thousand years in Satan and that was like my first reaction. It's like because I have so many feelings about this. It wasn't really like the psychological aspects. Like part of it was the questions of like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah.
But part of it, I think, is that visceral feeling of like, why is Satan coming back? Like, what?
That's
And
the
then
big
like,
question. Why?
and what?
Why? Who let him out? Why?
Well, and also, what does that say about our anthropology if even after the 1,000 years, that evil is still able to have its way with people.
Hmm.
And that just, if that feels horrible.
Well, so that can point to, I mean, to talk about from an a perspective anthropologically as well as what we talk about with our understanding and definition of what sin and evil are in the world.
Hmm.
That as Luther called it, hereditary sin. That there's just something, this simultaneously saint and sinner. That we always have the capacity for good and for destruction. That's just part of what it means to be human, right? And so this kind of alludes to the idea that they didn't lose that capacity just because of the 1,000 year reign, right?
Hmm.
That is innately inherent to being human.
Well, and I mean, I've already said it once in this podcast, but I'm going to say it again. We are held captive to sin and cannot free ourselves.
Hmm.
And I think,
So then also, you're drawing on the idea of like the perspective of like, is there a personified devil, Satan, or is evil just the repercussions of the human capacity for destruction? And that's a deep question that I think like everyone kind of has to decide for themselves. I kind of come down on the side that this idea of a personified devil is scapegoating the
mhm.
fact that like humans just have a capacity for
No,
destruction.
for me, I can't, I don't think of like Satan being personified. I think about like I said, it's like what are the systems and the structures that put people at the margin of the margins?
Mm. Mm-hmm.
That looking at idol. So like for me, it always comes back down to idolatry of like we are not following the one true God, that we're chasing the gods that we think will make us God.
Mm.
And we're chasing the idols that we think will make us God. And in the midst of chasing the idols, we get distracted. And that's where, like, hamartia, we miss the mark.
Mm-hmm.
That we cannot love ourselves, we cannot love our neighbor when we are in corvatus inse, when we're navel gazing.
Mm-hmm.
We can't care about others when we're so turned inward. And so I think a big part
Which
of,
would be Martin Luther's definition of sin as well,
yeah,
the
yeah,
concupiscence.
yeah. And so for me, it's not about Satan, it's about the very broken aspect of the human condition.
Mm. So the bigger question, why did God make us that way?
I think for me, it also goes back to Genesis. Let's go from the end to the beginning.
Let's do it.
For me, I think it goes back to Genesis. I think we want to know who our maker is, who made us, why they made us, and what does it mean? What can it mean to go home again?
Mm.
Because I think we are at home when we are with God, and we are not home because we are not with God. Like in the fullness and like wholeness of understanding what home is. I think God is not like the distant deist clockmaker. I think God is always with us, but I think we always have that separation.
Mm. And so then sin is a product of trying to go home.
No, sin is a product of trying to be God
Hmm.
in the midst of taking over God's home, even though that was God's house to begin with.
Yeah, I can go for that.
Yeah, I think in the midst of I think we always have a misinterpretation of home, and I always think about this within like a Western colonial mindset of we've destroyed home for so many people. Home has been
Mm,
destroyed for so many people, and it's been taken away, it's been robbed, it's been destroyed, it's been obliterated. And and I think that is where that is where God just continues to weep. That we're trying to be the whole, like we're trying to rule the roost per se, as opposed to recognizing that we are our guest in relationship.
hmm. Yeah. And that God through Jesus is continually trying to show us the way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. All right, guys. Thanks for helping unpack Satan's cage with us and Satan's body break. Thanks so much, Pastor Tuhina, for joining us for this very exciting
Thank you
episode.
for the invitation. I feel like I love talking about it, but I realize the more I talk about it, the more I don't know.
Yeah, I think that that's,
And I
probably
think I
true
want to
for
be
all of
really
us.
honest about that. Like the
Yeah.
more I talk about it, I learn so much more and it just completely brings even more questions. And so I think that like ask your questions, wrestle with your questions.
Yeah. This is one
I
of the
think,
beautiful parts of our faith.
oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. So next week, not last week, next week, we will conclude with our last series, our last episode in our series of our Revelation study, and we're going to talk about the Book of Life and that 144,000 chosen people. And to wrap all of this up, it's going to be kind of a little bit of a conglomerate of things to bring in the bookend here. So stay tuned for next week, and remember that you can find the study guide on our website, 10footballpodcast.com, in the Revelation section if you go to the drop down menu or /Revelation. And as always, follow us on Facebook and Instagram at 10 Football Podcasts and wherever you listen to podcasts. We're always coming out with new and fun things. And as a reminder that the 10 Football Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org. Take care, everyone. Until next week.